They threw me out into a Chicago snowstorm over 2 pink lines, believing I was a bad debt that would stain the family name. My father thought he removed a weakness, and my ex thought he escaped a burden, but they made a fatal business error by underestimating the compound interest of hatred. 7 years later, I am not back for child support. I returned as the sole creditor holding the mortgage on their lives. I do not want cash. I want total collapse. My name is Liliana Ashmore, and the night my life ended began with the popping of a cork. It was the sound of success, or at least that was what the 500 guests crowded into the ballroom of my father's estate believed. They were drinking vintage champagne that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, celebrating the impending initial public offering of Ashmore Dynamics. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the heavy, musky cologne worn by men who moved markets with a phone call. Outside, the Chicago winter was howling, a blizzard burying the city in white, but inside, the thermostat was set to a perfect 72 degrees. It was a golden cage, warm and bright, designed to make everyone forget the cold reality waiting just beyond the double doors. I was 21 years old, wearing a silk gown that shimmered like liquid silver, and I was terrified. I was not terrified of the investors or the sharks from Wall Street who were currently patting my father on the back. I was terrified of the secret resting in my clutch. Right next to a flash drive containing a forensic audit I had run on the company servers 3 hours ago. 2 pieces of information. One would destroy my father's mood. The other would destroy his carefully curated image. I naively believed that the former was the more dangerous of the two. I thought the financial discrepancy I had found in the IPO filing was the emergency. I thought the pregnancy was just a complication. I had no idea that in the mathematics of Preston Ashmore, a grandchild was a liability, but a fraud was just a line item. I navigated through the crowd, smiling until my jaw ached. I accepted compliments on my dress and nodded politely when elderly board members told me I looked just like my mother, a woman who had learned early on that the only way to survive being Mrs. Ashmore was to be invisible. I found Caleb near the bar. Caleb, my boyfriend of 2 years, the man I loved, the newly appointed director of marketing for Ashmore Dynamics. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, the very picture of the young corporate prince. He was laughing at a joke made by a venture capitalist, his head thrown back, his teeth white and perfect. I touched his elbow. He turned, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second when he saw the look in my eyes before he plastered it back on. "Reference the library," I whispered. 5 minutes. He frowned, checking his Rolex. "Lily, your dad is about to make the toast. Can it not wait?" "No," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It cannot wait." I walked away without waiting for his answer. I knew he would follow. Caleb was ambitious, but he was also curious, and he knew I did not make scenes. I slipped out of the ballroom and down the long, quiet hallway that led to the sanctuary of the house, my father's study. The heavy oak doors were closed, muting the roar of the party to a dull thrum. I pushed them open. Preston Ashmore was there, standing by the fireplace, swirling a glass of amber liquid. He looked up, annoyance flickering across his face. He hated interruptions. He hated anything that was not part of the script. "Liliana," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you should be out there charming the shareholders. We are 10 minutes away from the biggest moment in the history of this family. I need to talk to you. Dad, it is important." Caleb slipped into the room behind me, closing the door softly. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between me and the man who signed his paychecks. "What is going on?" "Lily." I took a breath. My hands were shaking. I walked over to the massive mahogany desk, the altar where my father worshipped his own ego, and I placed the flash drive on the leather blotter. I ran a diagnostic on the IPO prospectus this afternoon. I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I was double-checking the code I wrote for the logistics interface. The software valuation is inflated. Dad, someone cooked the books on the projected revenue for the 3rd quarter. It is off by 40%. If the SEC sees this, they will halt the offering. You could go to prison. Preston did not blink. He did not look at the flash drive. He looked at me with an expression of mild boredom, as if I had just told him the caterer ran out of shrimp. "Is that all?" he asked. I stared at him. "Is that all? Dad, this is fraud. I wrote that software. I know what it can do and what it cannot do. You are claiming revenue streams that do not exist yet." Creative accounting. Liliana, it is how the world works. Grow up. The projections are based on future contracts. It is standard practice. It is illegal, I argued, and it is my code. My name is on the patent application. His eyes narrowed. Your name is Ashmore. That means you own nothing. The family owns it. The company owns it. You are just the vessel. The cruelty in his voice slapped me harder than a physical blow. I looked at Caleb, waiting for him to step in, to defend me, to defend the integrity of the work we had both poured our lives into for the last year. But Caleb was studying the pattern on the Persian rug, refusing to meet my eyes. "I have something else to tell you," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Preston took a sip of his drink. "Make it quick. I am pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. The crackling of the logs in the fireplace sounded like gunshots. Preston slowly lowered his glass to the mantel. He turned to face me fully, and for the first time, I saw the monster beneath the suit. There was no joy. There was no shock. There was only a cold, calculating assessment, like a butcher eyeing a side of beef that had gone bad. He looked at Caleb. "Is it yours?" Caleb nodded, his face pale. "Yes, sir." Preston let out a short, sharp breath through his nose. He walked around the desk and sat down. Opening a drawer, he pulled out a single sheet of paper and a fountain pen. He slid them across the mahogany surface toward me. "Fix it," he said. I did not understand. "Fix what?" "The situation," Preston said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Get rid of it. Tonight, I have a doctor on retainer who can handle this discreetly. You will go out the back door. Caleb will drive you to the clinic, and you will be back before the press release goes out tomorrow morning." I instinctively placed a hand over my stomach. "No." Preston stopped writing. He looked up, his eyes dead. "Excuse me." "I said no," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "I am not killing my child to protect your stock price. We can make this work. Caleb and I." I turned to Caleb, reaching for his hand. "Caleb, tell him. Tell him we are keeping the baby. We can get married. We can move into the guest house. I can still work from home until the baby is born." Caleb finally looked at me. His eyes were watery, but his jaw was set. He pulled his hand away from mine. "Lily, be reasonable," Caleb said. His voice was pleading, but it was not pleading for our child. It was pleading for his career. This is the IPO. If news gets out that the CEO's daughter is unwed and pregnant, it looks messy. It looks like we lack discipline. Your dad is right. We are not ready for this. I stared at him, feeling the floor tilt beneath my feet. "You are choosing a job over us." "I am choosing our future," Caleb said, reciting the lines my father had likely fed him 1,000 times. "I am the marketing director. Lily, I cannot have a scandal right now. Just do what he says. We can try again in 5 years, when the stock is stable." In that moment, the love I had felt for him for 2 years evaporated, replaced by a nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness. He was not a partner. He was an employee, and he had just negotiated his severance package with my heart. I turned back to my father. "I am keeping the baby, and I am not signing off on the fraudulent reports." Preston stood up. He was a tall man, imposing, and he used his height like a weapon. He walked around the desk until he was standing inches from me. He smelled of scotch and contempt. "Then you leave me no choice," he said. He picked up the document he had placed on the desk. "This is a quitclaim deed and a non-disclosure agreement. It states that you voluntarily relinquish all rights to the Ashmore Family Trust, all future inheritance, and most importantly, you assign full, irrevocable ownership of the Phantom Code software to Ashmore Dynamics." "Why would I sign that?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. "Because if you do not," Preston said softly, almost gently, I will destroy you, but if you sign it, I will give you a check for $50,000. You can take your bastard and go live your mediocre life somewhere far away from here." I looked at the paper. It was a blood contract. He wanted my intellectual property, the software that was actually going to make the company billions, and he wanted me to disappear. And if I do not sign, I challenged him. "Then you get nothing," he said, "and you leave with nothing." I looked at Caleb one last time. He was looking at the fireplace, a coward to the end. "I am not signing," I said, "and I am not getting an abortion." Preston nodded, as if he had expected this. He reached out and snatched the clutch from my hand. "Hey," I shouted. He upended the purse on the desk, my phone, my car keys, my wallet. He swept them all into his drawer and locked it. "Those are mine," I said. "I paid for the phone." Preston said, "I paid for the car. I pay the credit card bills. You are 21 years old, Liliana, but you have never earned a dime in your life that I did not give you. You want to be an adult. You want to be a mother. Fine, be one. But you do not get to do it on my payroll." He pointed a shaking finger at the heavy oak door. "You are a liability to this family name," he spat, the veneer of the sophisticated businessman finally cracking to reveal the ugly rage beneath. "You are a liability, and you are out of the will. Get out of my house." "Dad, please," I whispered. "It is snowing. I have nowhere to go." "I do not care," he said. "Call security if she is not out in 2 minutes." He turned his back on me. I looked at Caleb. He stood there, stiff and silent, a statue of a man. He did not offer me a ride. He did not offer me a coat. He did not offer me a single word of comfort. He just stood there and watched his boss execute his girlfriend. I did not cry. Not then. The shock was too great, freezing the tears in my ducts. I reached under the chair where I had been sitting earlier, pulled out my coat, a thin cashmere trench coat that was designed for fashion, not for a blizzard, and I put it on over my silk dress. I walked to the door. I paused, my hand on the brass knob. Preston did not turn around. Caleb did not look up. I walked out of the study. I walked back down the hallway, past the laughter and the music of the ballroom. I did not stop to say goodbye to anyone. I walked straight to the front doors, the heavy timber groaning as I pushed them open against the wind. The cold hit me like a physical assault. The wind was screaming, a white wall of snow that blinded me instantly. The temperature was 5 degrees below zero. The valet parking attendants were huddled in their booth, heaters blasting. They looked at me, a girl in a ball gown and a thin coat walking out into the storm. With confusion, one of them started to step out, perhaps to ask if I needed my car. But I just kept walking. I did not have a ticket. I did not have a car. I walked down the long, winding driveway, the snow soaking through my satin heels within seconds. My feet went numb before I reached the iron gates. The wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to protect the tiny, flickering life inside me from the brutal indifference of the world. When I reached the main road, I stopped. I was shivering violently now, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they would crack. I turned back to look at the house. It sat on the hill like a castle, glowing with golden light. Every window was blazing. I could see the silhouettes of the guests dancing, eating, celebrating the wealth that my father had built on lies and that Caleb was protecting with his silence. It looked so warm. It looked so safe. It looked like heaven. And I had just been cast down into the frozen hell of reality. I stared at that light until it burned into my retinas. I etched every detail of that mansion into my memory. The way the roof peaked against the storm clouds, the way the portico columns stood like guards, the way the light spilled out onto the snow, indifferent to the fact that it was illuminating my exile. I made a vow then, speaking into the howling wind so that only the storm could hear me. I will not die here. I will not let my child die here. I will survive this cold. And one day, I am going to come back. I am not going to ask for an apology. I am not going to ask for forgiveness. I am going to buy that light, I whispered, my breath pluming in the freezing air, and I'm going to turn it off. I turned my back on the Ashmore estate and began to walk into the darkness. One frozen step at a time, the snow swirled around me, erasing my footprints as soon as I made them, as if the world was trying to wipe away the evidence that I had ever existed. But I knew the truth. I was not a bad debt, I was an investment, and the maturity date was just beginning. 7 years is a long time to stay angry, but it is the exact amount of time required to build a portfolio capable of swallowing a man whole. The first 3 years were a blur of ammonia and exhaustion. I did not go to a shelter. I was too proud, or perhaps too stupid, to accept that level of defeat. Instead, I found a landlord in the South Side who accepted cash and did not ask for a credit check, mostly because the apartment had a radiator that screamed like a dying animal and windows that rattled with every passing train. I traded my silk ball gown for a pair of rubber gloves and a uniform that smelled of industrial lemon cleaner. I scrubbed floors in office buildings where girls my age sat in cubicles complaining about the air conditioning. I cleaned toilets in restaurants where I used to order wine without looking at the price. I became invisible. I was the ghost that emptied the trash cans, the shadow that wiped down the glass conference tables. And in the middle of that darkness, Stella was born. She arrived on a humid Tuesday in a county hospital where the nurses looked more tired than the patients when the doctor placed her in my arms. I looked down at her face and saw the only clean thing in my entire world. She had my eyes, thank God. But she had Caleb's chin. Looking at her was a double-edged sword. A mixture of overwhelming love and a sharp, stinging reminder of the betrayal that put us there, but when her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. The fear that had been paralyzing me since the night of the blizzard evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I promised her, whispering into her soft hair, that she would never know the cold like I did. I promised her that I would build a fortress around her so high that no Ashmore could ever hurt her. That promise required money, and money required knowledge. My nights became a ritual. After I put Stella to sleep in her crib, which I had bought from a thrift store for $20, I would take the bus to the public library downtown. It was the only place that was warm, free, and open late. I did not read novels. I read the law. I read the Uniform Commercial Code until my eyes burned. I devoured books on corporate bankruptcy, distressed assets, and leverage buyouts. I taught myself the language of the enemy. I realized that the people who had destroyed me spoke a dialect of contracts and clauses that I had been too naive to understand at 21. It was during those nights that I discovered my talent. It was a strange, almost predatory instinct. I could look at a company's balance sheet and smell the rot before the numbers even turned red. I could spot the overleverage, the hidden liabilities, the desperate cash grabs. I saw patterns that others missed. To me, a failing company looked like a wounded animal limping through the forest. And I learned that in the financial ecosystem, you were either the predator or the carrion. I was tired of being the carrion. The turning point came 4 years in. I was at the library, staring at a stack of documents on a table, muttering to myself about a clause in a real estate holding contract. A man was sitting across from me. He looked like a statue that had been left out in the rain too long. His suit was expensive but frayed at the cuffs, and he had the weary eyes of a gambler who had lost his last chip. He asked me what I was reading. I told him I was analyzing a restructuring deal for a mid-sized logistics firm. I told him the deal was garbage because the senior lenders had failed to secure the rolling stock as collateral. He laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. He told me I was wrong. He told me the banks were smarter than that. I pushed the paper across the table and pointed to line 42. They missed the lien release. I said, "The trucks are free and clear. The debtor can sell them tomorrow and leave the bank with nothing but paper." The man picked up the document. He read it once. Then he read it again. When he looked up at me, the weariness was gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating gleam. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am nobody." I said, "Just a janitor." "My name is Elias Thorne," he said, "and you are the first person in 5 years to spot a mistake that I missed." Elias was a legend, or at least he had been. He was a Wall Street raider who had been banned from the securities industry for 5 years due to an insider trading scandal that was mostly a setup by his rivals. He had the capital and the connections, but he was radioactive. He could not sign deals. He needed a face. He needed someone clean, someone hungry, someone who understood that the difference between the law and a crime was often just a matter of better paperwork. We made a deal in a diner over coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. He put up the initial seed money. I put up the brain and the relentless drive. We founded Vanguard Capital. The first year was brutal. We bought consumer debt credit cards, medical bills, pennies on the dollar. I spent my days on the phone, negotiating with people who were just as desperate as I had been. But I was good at it. I knew exactly what to say because I knew exactly what they were afraid of. We turned a profit in 6 months. Then we moved up. We started buying commercial paper, small businesses that were defaulting. We were vultures, circling the dying carcasses of the economy. But we were efficient. We stripped the meat, sold the bones, and reinvested every cent. I stopped cleaning floors. I moved us out of the drafty apartment and into a condo in a secure building. I hired a nanny for Stella so I could work 18 hours a day. I transformed. The girl who had pleaded with her father in a silk dress was dead. In her place stood a woman who wore tailored charcoal suits as armor. I learned to walk into a boardroom full of men and suck the oxygen out of the room with a single stare. They called me the vulture queen behind my back. They said I was heartless. They had no idea that my heart was the only thing fueling the engine. While I was building my empire brick by brick, I kept a silent watch on the kingdom I had been exiled from. Ashmore Dynamics was bleeding. It was not a rapid hemorrhage. It was a slow, agonizing leak. Preston was a visionary, but he was a terrible manager. Without my code, which they had never been able to fully replicate or update, because I had encrypted the core architecture before I left, their logistics platform was buggy and outdated. Clients were leaving. To compensate, Preston was borrowing heavily. He was leveraging the company's future to pay for his present lifestyle. And Caleb, my dear Caleb, he had risen to vice president, but his incompetence was staggering. He was skimming. I saw it in the subcontractor invoices. He was setting up shell companies to bill Ashmore Dynamics for marketing consulting that never happened. It was sloppy. It was greedy. It was perfect. I did not attack them directly. Not yet. That would have been too loud. Instead, I started buying their trash. I instructed my team to identify every small vendor that Ashmore Dynamics owed money to. The catering company that serviced their holiday parties. The landscaping firm that maintained the estate grounds. The HVAC repair company that fixed the servers. Preston was arrogant. He thought these people were beneath him. So he paid them late, or he did not pay them at all. He squeezed the little guys because he thought they were powerless. He was wrong. I approached them one by one. I offered to buy their overdue invoices for 80 cents on the dollar. They were grateful. They took the cash and signed over the rights to the debt. It was not a lot of money in the grand scheme, 10,000 here, 15,000 there. To a company worth millions, it was irrelevant. But to me, each invoice was a hook. I was inserting hundreds of tiny hooks into the skin of Ashmore Dynamics. I became the invisible hand holding their operational debt. I owned the paper on their air conditioning. I owned the paper on their security system. I owned the paper on the fuel for their corporate jets. 7 years later, I stood in my corner office on the 45th floor of a building in the financial district. The view was breathtaking. The city of Chicago lay spread out beneath me, a grid of lights and steel. It was a long way from the basement apartment with the screaming radiator. I turned away from the window and looked at my desk. It was a slab of black marble, cold and imposing. Sitting in the center of it was a single, thick file. It was not a business plan. It was an execution order. My intercom buzzed. It was my assistant. "Mr. Thorne is here," she said. "Send him in." Elias walked in. He looked better these days. The gray in his hair was distinguished now, not haggard. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He looked at the file on my desk and then at me. "Are we ready?" he asked. I ran my hand over the leather cover of the file. Inside was the summary of every debt I had acquired, every lien I had perfected, and the crowning jewel, the acquisition strategy for the senior secured loans that were about to go into default. The market thinks Ashmore Dynamics is just having a bad quarter, I said. They think Preston can refinance like he always does. And what do you think? Elias asked, leaning against the doorframe, a small smile playing on his lips. I picked up the file. I did not think. I knew. I think he is technically insolvent. I said, he just does not know it yet because the bank has not called the note. But the bank is tired. Elias, I had lunch with the risk officer at First City Bank yesterday. They want out. They are terrified of the auditors. They are looking for a buyer for the entire Ashmore debt package. Elias whistled low. That is a big shark to swallow. Liliana, $50 million. If you buy that debt, you become the primary creditor. You control the company. No, I corrected him, my voice flat and hard. I do not just control the company, I own the man. I walked over to the wall where I had hung a framed photo. It was not a picture of Stella. It was a picture of the Ashmore estate, taken from a magazine article about the glorious lifestyle of Preston Ashmore. It showed the house glowing in the night, the warm yellow lights spilling out onto the snow, the same lights I had looked back at 7 years ago. I told myself I would buy that light, I whispered. Elias watched me. He knew the history. He knew why we had named the company Vanguard. He knew that for me, this was never about the profit margins. Do it, Elias said. Pull the trigger. I walked back to my desk and opened the file. The first page was a purchase agreement for the senior debt of Ashmore Dynamics. The price was steep, but I had the liquidity. I had spent 7 years hoarding cash, living below my means, building a war chest for this exact moment. I picked up my pen. It was heavy, balanced, a weapon of ink and steel. This is not a hostile takeover, I said, signing my name with a flourish. This is a foreclosure. I looked at Elias. Call the lawyers, I said. Tell them we are buying the debt, and tell them to prepare the restructuring proposal. I want a meeting with the board of Ashmore Dynamics by the end of the week. Elias nodded and turned to leave. Oh, and Elias, I called out. He stopped. Make sure they know that the new creditor remains anonymous for now. I said, I want to see the look on his face when he realizes that the liability he threw out in the snow has come back to liquidate his legacy. Elias closed the door. I stood alone in the silence of my office. I was 29 years old. I was the founder of Vanguard Capital. I was a mother, and I was the executioner of the Ashmore family. The acquisition phase was over. The liquidation was about to begin. In the high-stakes world of corporate finance, desperation has a very specific scent. It smells like stale coffee in a boardroom at 3 a.m, mixed with the sharp tang of fear sweating through a bespoke suit. For the past month, I had been smelling that desperation wafting from the headquarters of Ashmore Dynamics all the way to my office across the city. My father, Preston Ashmore, was bleeding. It was not a physical wound, but to a man like him, it was far worse. It was a liquidity crisis. My forensic analysis of their quarterly projections indicated that Ashmore Dynamics was burning through cash at a rate that would make a startup blush. They had $50 million in short-term obligations coming due in 30 days, and their liquid assets were sitting at less than $10 million. The gap was massive, a $40 million canyon that threatened to swallow the entire company. Preston was scrambling. My sources inside the major lending institutions' contacts I had cultivated over 7 years of trading favors and information told me that he had been quietly meeting with the senior risk officers of every major bank in Chicago and New York. He was asking for a bridge loan. He was asking for a lifeline. They all told him the same thing, no. 7 years ago, Preston Ashmore could have walked into Chase or Citibank and walked out with $100 million on a handshake. But the market has a long memory, the rumors of his creative accounting, the constant turnover in his executive suite, and the lackluster performance of the logistics software had eroded his creditworthiness. He was now considered a high-risk borrower. He was toxic. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the opening move in a game I had been simulating in my head for 2,555 days. I did not approach Preston. That would have been amateur. I approached the people who held the leash he was currently choking on. I set up a meeting with the vice president of special assets at First City Bank, the institution that held the majority of Ashmore Dynamics' existing commercial debt. His name was Robert Vance, a man who looked like he had not slept since the financial crisis of 2008. We met in a private dining room at a club where membership cost more than my first apartment. Vance was nervous. He knew Ashmore Dynamics was teetering on the edge of default, and if that happened on his watch, his quarterly bonus would evaporate. He was looking for an exit strategy, and I was about to hand him a golden parachute. I sat across from him, sipping sparkling water, while he picked at his salad. I understand you are holding roughly $60 million in senior secured notes for Ashmore Dynamics, I said, keeping my voice conversational. And I understand that the internal rating on that debt has just been downgraded to junk status. Vance flinched. News travels fast, Ms. Ashmore. Though I suppose since you run Vanguard Capital now, you have your ear to the ground. I do, I said, and I'm here to offer you a solution. Vanguard Capital is willing to purchase the entire Ashmore debt portfolio from First City Bank. We will take the headache off your books completely. Vance stopped eating. He looked at me with sudden intensity. You want to buy the paper? Why? You know Preston is drowning. I smiled. A thin, meaningless expression. Distressed assets are my specialty. Robert, you know that. I see value where you see risk. I believe I can restructure the company and turn a profit, but that is my concern, not yours. The question is, do you want to be the one explaining a $60 million write-off to your board next month, or do you want to report a clean sale? How much? He asked. I leaned forward. 70 cents on the dollar. Cash. Wire transfer completes within 24 hours. He scoffed. 70 cents? That is a 30% haircut. The board will never approve that. They will if the alternative is zero, I countered calmly. And let us be honest, Robert, if Preston defaults, which he will be lucky to get 10 cents on the dollar after the bankruptcy lawyers take their fees. I am offering you $42 million in cold, hard cash. Today, you can mark it as a strategic divestment and keep your bonus. I watched the calculations playing out behind his eyes. He was doing the math. He was weighing the certainty of my cash against the uncertainty of my father's promises. Greed and fear were battling it out, and fear was winning. He put down his fork. Send over the purchase agreement. The deal was closed the next morning, in a series of encrypted wire transfers. Vanguard Capital became the sole owner of Ashmore Dynamics debt. I now owned the mortgage on their headquarters, the liens on their equipment, and the personal guarantees Preston had foolishly signed years ago. But owning the debt was only the ammunition. I needed a sniper to pull the trigger. I needed Julian Blackwood. Julian was a legend in New York commercial law, mostly because he had absolutely no moral compass. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, a man who specialized in hostile takeovers, corporate raids, and destroying livelihoods with a single well-placed clause. He was expensive, arrogant, and exactly what I needed. I met him in his office in Manhattan, a glass box suspended 1,000 feet above the street. He did not stand up when I entered. He just gestured to the chair opposite his desk, his eyes scanning me with clinical detachment. Liliana Ashmore, he said, his voice smooth like oiled leather. The Vulture Queen of Chicago. I have heard interesting things. I sat down, placing my briefcase on the floor. I hope you heard that I pay on time and I win. Julian, because that is all that matters. He smirked. Indeed. You want to retain me for a restructuring deal. Ashmore Dynamics. I nodded. I just acquired their senior debt. I need you to represent Vanguard Capital in the enforcement proceedings, but there are specific rules of engagement. Julian raised an eyebrow. I am listening. First, I said, leaning back in the chair, you are the face of this operation. My name, and the name Vanguard Capital, must remain buried under layers of shell companies. As far as Ashmore Dynamics is concerned, Their debt was purchased by a blind trust called Nemesis Holdings. You are the trustee. You are the only person they speak to. Privacy is standard, Julian said. What else? Second, Preston Ashmore must not know that I am the one pulling the strings until the trap is fully closed. He needs to believe he is dealing with a faceless institutional investor. He thinks he can charm corporate suits. He thinks he can lie his way out of trouble. I want you to let him think that. Let him feel comfortable. Let him think he's negotiating. And then? Julian asked. And then, when he is most vulnerable, we crush him. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a draft term sheet I had prepared. I slid it across the desk to him. This is the restructuring agreement you will present to him. I said, it looks standard. It offers him a forbearance period. It gives him the $50 million in working capital he needs to survive the quarter. He will read it, and he will see a lifeline. He will be so relieved to get the money that he will skim over the covenants. Julian picked up the document and began to read. His eyes moved quickly down the page. He stopped at page 14. A slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. Clause 14b, he read aloud. The lender reserves the right to declare an immediate event of default and accelerate the full balance of the loan if the borrower's current ratio falls below 1.5 for a period of more than 24 consecutive hours. He looked up at me, his eyes gleaming with professional admiration. This is brutal. Liliana, most banks set the covenant at 1.0, or maybe 1.2. Setting it at 1.5 means they have to keep 50% more current assets than liabilities at all times. Exactly, I said. And do you know what Ashmore Dynamics' current ratio is right now? Julian checked his computer screen. Based on their last public filing, it is hovering around 1.6. Correct, I said. But next week, they have a massive payroll obligation hitting and a vendor payment for their server farms. Once that cash leaves their account, their ratio will drop to 1.4. Julian laughed. It was a cold sound. So you are lending them money, but you are setting a tripwire that they will trigger simply by paying their bills. Will he sign it? Julian asked. I looked out the window at the skyline. He is desperate. He is arrogant. And he has Caleb advising him. Caleb does not understand liquidity ratios. He thinks revenue is the same as cash. Yes, Julian, he will sign it. He will sign it because he thinks he is smarter than the person across the table. He has no idea that the person across the table is his daughter. Julian closed the folder. I like it. It is elegant. It is vicious. I will draw up the final papers. 2 days later, the notification was sent. I was sitting in my office in Chicago, watching the surveillance feed I had tapped into. It was illegal, of course, but after 7 years, the line between legal and necessary had blurred significantly for me. I had a camera feed from the boardroom of Ashmore Dynamics. Preston was sitting at the head of the table, his face flushed red. Caleb was pacing back and forth, looking like a cornered rat. "Who the hell is Nemesis Holdings?" Preston shouted, slamming a letter down on the mahogany table. "I do not know," Caleb stammered. "I Googled them. It is a shell company registered in Delaware. No website, no employee list, just a lawyer's address in New York. My bank sold my debt." Preston raged. "Vance sold me out. After 20 years of business, he sold my paper to some vulture fund without even a courtesy call." "We have to call them," Caleb said. "We have to set up a meeting. We need that operating capital. Preston, if we do not make payroll next week, the engineers will walk. If the engineers walk, the IPO is dead in the water." Preston took a deep breath, adjusting his tie. He was trying to regain his composure, trying to summon the persona of the titan of industry. "Fine," he said. "Get this lawyer on the phone. What is his name?" "Julian Blackwood." Caleb nodded. "I have heard of him. He is expensive." "Good," Preston said, a sneer appearing on his face. "Expensive lawyers are mercenaries. They can be bought. They can be reasoned with. This is just a transaction. Caleb, whoever is behind this Nemesis Holdings, just wants a return on their investment. We will offer them a higher interest rate. We will give them some warrants. We will charm them." I watched on the screen as Preston leaned back in his chair, his confidence returning. He was already rewriting the narrative in his head. He was not a victim. He was a negotiator. He believed he was still the king of his castle. "This is a negotiation," Preston said, waving his hand dismissively. "We will walk in there, show them the projections, and they will be begging to lend us money. We are Ashmore Dynamics. We are the future." I watched him, feeling a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. He was so sure of himself. He was so convinced that his name still carried weight, that his charm was still a valid currency. He did not realize that his currency had been devalued to 0 7 years ago when he threw his pregnant daughter out into the snow. I picked up my phone and dialed Julian's number. "He just received the package," I said when Julian answered. "He is going to call you." "I am ready," Julian replied. "Set the meeting for Friday," I instructed. "That gives him 2 days to sweat, 2 days to realize how few options he has." And Julian, "Yes. When he asks for terms, give him everything he wants. Give him the interest rate he asks for. Give him the repayment schedule he wants. Make him think he has won. Just make sure Clause 14b is in there, buried deep in the covenants." "Understood," Julian said. "And the collateral?" "Everything." I said, "I want to lean on everything. The intellectual property, the real estate, the inventory, and I want a personal guarantee from both Preston and Caleb. If the company goes down, I want them to lose their houses, their cars, their retirement funds. I want them naked." "That is aggressive," Julian noted. "They took my coat in a blizzard." "Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "aggressive is the only language I speak now." I hung up the phone. On the screen, Preston was pouring himself a drink. He was laughing now, clapping Caleb on the shoulder, probably making a joke about how they were going to outsmart the New York lawyers. "Laugh while you can. Father, I thought—" The trap was set. The bait was the $50 million they so desperately needed. The jaws of the trap were the liquidity covenant. And I was the hunter, waiting in the blind, my finger on the release mechanism. Preston Ashmore had spent his life treating people like assets and liabilities. He was about to learn a very painful lesson in accounting. Assets can depreciate, but a liability, if left unchecked, can grow until it consumes everything. I was his liability, and I was coming to collect. The phone call that shattered the fragile peace inside the executive suite of Ashmore Dynamics lasted exactly 4 minutes. I was not in the room, but I might as well have been. The audio feed from the bug I had planted in the smoke detector, a simple device installed by a janitor on my payroll 3 months ago, was crystal clear. I sat in my darkened office, a glass of water in my hand, listening to the sound of my father's world beginning to crack. Julian Blackwood had delivered the message with the precision of a surgeon cutting into a tumor. He had told them that Nemesis Holdings, the new owner of their debt, was concerned about the company's solvency. He had used the word liquidation. He had used the word foreclosure. And then he had politely suggested a face-to-face meeting to discuss the transition of assets. Silence hung heavy in the room after the speakerphone clicked off. Then, the explosion came. "They cannot do this." Caleb's voice was high, bordering on hysterical. He was pacing. I could hear the rapid scuff of his leather soles on the carpet. "Liquidation. Preston, they are talking about selling the furniture while we are still sitting on it. We have to stop them. We have to file for an injunction." "On what grounds?" Preston snapped. His voice was lower, tighter. It was the sound of a man who was used to being the bully suddenly realizing he was the one being shoved against a locker. "We defaulted on the covenants the moment the bank sold the debt. They have the right to call the note." "We need money," Caleb said. "We need to show them cash. Preston, look, we have the account in the Caymans, the consultancy fund. There is nearly $4 million in there. We can repatriate it. Call it an emergency injection from a silent partner." I leaned forward in my chair. There it was, the confirmation. I had suspected Caleb was skimming money into offshore accounts for years, using fake consulting firms to bill the company for services never rendered. He called it a consultancy fund. The law called it embezzlement. "You are an idiot," Preston hissed. "You want to bring dirty money back into the company while we are under a microscope. If the auditors see $4 million appear out of thin air, they will trace it, and when they find out it came from shell companies you control, we will not just be bankrupt, we will be in federal prison. That money stays buried. Do you hear me?" "But we need liquidity," Caleb argued. "We need time," Preston corrected, "and we need to look like we do not need their money. Perception is reality. Caleb, if we look like we are dying, they will bury us. If we look like we are thriving, they will hesitate. They will think we have other options." "So what do?" Caleb asked. "We throw a party," Preston said. I almost laughed out loud in my empty office. It was so classic Preston Ashmore. When the ship is sinking, order more champagne for the orchestra. "The Winter Gala," Preston continued, his voice gaining that familiar, diluted confidence. "It is this Saturday. We were going to cancel it to save costs. But now we are going to double the budget. We invite everyone, the board, the investors, the politicians, and we invite this Julian Blackwood. We bring him into our world. We show him the power of the Ashmore name. We make him see that foreclosing on us would be a social and political suicide." I watched the plan form in his mind. He truly believed that canapés and expensive wine could stop a margin call. He lived in a world where relationships and handshakes mattered more than balance sheets. He did not realize that world had ended for him the moment I signed the purchase agreement. I turned my attention to the visual feed on my laptop. I had hacked into the security cameras of the building weeks ago. I watched Caleb collapse onto a sofa, running his hands through his hair. He looked older than his 29 years. The stress of maintaining the lie was eating him alive. But he had a backup plan. I saw him pull out his phone and dial a number. His tone changed instantly, shifting from panic to a honeyed, manipulative charm. "Elena, baby," he said. "Yes, I am just leaving the office. Tough day. You know how it is being at the top. Listen, about the gala on Saturday, I want to make it special. I think it is the perfect time to make the announcement. Yes, you and me. It will be the highlight of the night." I froze. An announcement. I typed a command into my keyboard, pulling up the dossier my private investigator had compiled on Caleb's recent activities. I scrolled past the gambling debts and the offshore transfers until I found the section on personal relationships. Elena Vance, 23 years old, recent graduate of Vassar, and more importantly, the daughter of Senator Marcus Vance, the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. The pieces clicked together with a sickening logic. Caleb was not just dating her, he was merging with her. He was planning to marry the daughter of a powerful senator to shield himself. If he became the son-in-law of Marcus Vance, no bank would dare touch him. He would have political immunity. He was using this girl just like he had used me, a stepping stone to secure his own safety. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. It was not jealousy. That part of me had died in the snow 7 years ago. This was professional offense. He was trying to cheat the game. He was trying to bring a civilian into the war zone to use as a human shield. I looked at the calendar. The Winter Gala was in 48 hours. I needed to send a message. I needed to let them know that this was not a social event. It was a wake. I picked up my phone and called a specialty wine broker I used for client gifts. "I need a bottle," I said. "Something rare. Something specific." "What are you looking for, Ms. Ashmore?" the broker asked. "A 1998 Screaming Eagle Cabernet," I said. "That is an expensive bottle," he whistled. "Roughly $5,000. Celebrating a special occasion." "You could say that," I replied. "It is my birth year." I want it delivered to the Ashmore estate on Saturday night. I instructed, during the gala, and I want a note attached. "What should the card say?" "Just 2 words," I said. "Past due." Saturday night arrived, wrapped in a bitter wind, a ghostly echo of the night I had left. But inside the Ashmore estate, the heating system was fighting back the chill, creating an artificial summer for the 200 guests swanning through the ballroom. I was not there physically. I sat in my penthouse, the lights dimmed, watching the event through the high-definition security cameras I had compromised. I saw Julian Blackwood arrive. He looked like a shark swimming through a coral reef. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like armor. Preston greeted him at the door, shaking his hand with a grip that was too firm, his smile too wide. "Mr. Blackwood," Preston boomed, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "So glad you could make it. Please, come in. Let me introduce you to the senator." Preston was working the room, trying to weave a web of influence around my lawyer. He was introducing Julian to judges, to CEOs, to anyone who could make him seem untouchable. He was showing off his assets, unaware that none of them belonged to him anymore. Then, I saw Caleb. He was standing on a raised platform near the orchestra, holding a microphone. Beside him stood a young woman with blonde hair and wide, innocent eyes. Elena. She looked adoringly at him, oblivious to the fact that she was holding the hand of a parasite. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caleb announced, his voice smooth and amplified, "thank you for joining us tonight. We have faced some headwinds this year. It is true, the market is tough, but the Ashmore family is tougher." Applause rippled through the room, polite, wealthy applause. "And tonight," Caleb continued, squeezing Elena's hand, "I want to celebrate the future. I want to celebrate the fact that true partnership is about finding someone who elevates you. Someone who matches your ambition, not someone who drags you down." My hands tightened on the armrests of my chair. "I made mistakes in my youth," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was meant to simulate vulnerability. "I wasted time on people who did not understand the vision. I wasted time on relationships that were liabilities." The word hung in the air. Liability. The exact word my father had used. Caleb was using our history, twisting it, turning me into the villain of his story to make himself look like the survivor. He was telling this room full of people that I was the dead weight he had to cut loose to soar. "But I found my way." He smiled, turning to Elena. "I found someone who represents the best of what we can be." He was about to propose. I could see him reaching into his pocket. At that exact moment, a waiter approached Preston, who was standing just off the stage. The waiter was holding a wooden box. Preston waved him away, annoyed at the interruption during his protégé's big moment, but the waiter insisted. He whispered something to Preston. Preston frowned and took the box. He opened it. The camera zoomed in. I saw the bottle of 1998 Screaming Eagle, and I saw the card. Preston picked up the card. He read it. Past due. He stared at it for a second, confusion clouding his face. Then, he looked at the bottle. He checked the vintage. 1998. The year I was born. For a split second, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He looked around the room, scanning the faces, his gaze darting to the shadows. Did he think I was there? Did he think I had ghosted back into the house to haunt him? Then, the arrogance returned. He shook his head, letting out a short, dismissive breath. He handed the box to the waiter and whispered something. I read his lips. Some competitor trying to be funny, put it in the cellar. He thought it was a joke. He thought it was a corporate prank from a rival firm. He could not conceive that his daughter, the girl he had discarded, could afford a $5,000 bottle of wine, let alone orchestrate a takeover of his life. He dismissed me, just like he had dismissed me 7 years ago. On the stage, Caleb dropped to one knee. Elena gasped. The crowd cooed. "Will you marry me?" Caleb asked. "Yes," she cried. The room erupted in cheers. Champagne corks popped. The music swelled. Caleb stood up and kissed her, looking out over the crowd with a triumphant smirk. He had done it. He had secured the senator's daughter. He thought he was safe. I watched them celebrate. I watched Preston clap Caleb on the back, the two of them sharing a look of conspiratorial victory. They thought they had pulled off the illusion. They thought the lights, the music, and the ring had blinded Julian Blackwood to the rot beneath the floorboards. I reached for my phone and typed a message to Julian. "Did you enjoy the show?" I wrote. His reply came 10 seconds later. "It was entertaining. The senator is indeed a heavy hitter. Your father thinks he has checkmated us. I typed back. He just added another innocent victim to the collateral damage. Clause 14b remains in effect. Understood, Julian replied. I closed the laptop. The party was still going, but the mood in my office was silent and cold. Caleb's speech echoed in my mind. He had called me a liability. He had called me a mistake. He was right about one thing. I was a mistake. I was the biggest mistake he had ever made. He had just publicly tied his fate to a new family, dragging them into the blast radius. He was not just arrogant. He was cancerous. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Enjoy your engagement. Caleb, I whispered to the glass. Drink the champagne. Kiss the girl. Because on Monday morning, the honeymoon ends and the eviction begins. They had taken the bait. They had thrown the party. They had spent money they did not have to impress a man who was already holding a knife to their throats. And in their hubris, they had given me the final weapon I needed. By involving the senator, they had raised the stakes. Now, when they fell, they would not just fall privately, they would fall globally. I turned off the lights in my office. The game was no longer about money, it was about legacy, and I was about to erase theirs. Monday morning arrived at the headquarters of Ashmore Dynamics, with the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of an execution chamber disguised as a corporate boardroom. I was sitting in my office across the city. The lights dimmed. My eyes locked on the high-definition monitor that displayed the interior of the enemy's sanctuary. The camera feed was crisp, picking up the dust motes dancing in the sunlight that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a beautiful room. The table was a slab of imported mahogany that cost more than a starter home. The chairs were hand-stitched Italian leather. On the wall hung a modernist painting that I knew for a fact was a forgery, replacing the original that Preston had quietly sold 3 years ago to cover a margin call. It was a perfect stage for a tragedy. My lawyer, Julian Blackwood, entered the frame at exactly 9 a.m. He did not knock. He simply pushed the double doors open and walked in with the fluid, predatory grace of a panther entering a petting zoo. He was wearing a navy suit that was tailored to within a millimeter of his life, and he carried nothing but a slim leather folio. I adjusted the volume on my headset. Testing, I whispered. Can you hear me? Julian. Julian tapped his right ear lightly, a subtle gesture that looked like he was adjusting an itch, but I knew it was his confirmation. He was wired. I was in his ear, a ghost voice guiding his every move. Preston Ashmore and Caleb stood up as he entered. They were putting on a brave face, but I could see the cracks in the porcelain. Preston's eyes were rimmed with red. A souvenir from the gala's after-party, or perhaps a sleepless night staring at the ceiling. Caleb looked twitchy. He was checking his phone every 30 seconds. Likely terrified that his new fiancée would text him asking why her father was asking questions about his credit score. Mr. Blackwood, Preston boomed, extending a hand. He was using his boardroom voice, deep and resonant, designed to intimidate subordinates. Welcome to Ashmore Dynamics. Can I offer you some coffee? Maybe something stronger. I have a Japanese whiskey that is older than you are. I spoke into the microphone. Do not shake his hand. Do not sit until he feels small. Julian ignored the outstretched hand. He ignored the offer of a drink. He walked to the head of the table, Preston's seat, and pulled out the chair. He sat down, placing his folio on the table with a heavy thud. Preston's hand hovered in the air for a second, foolish and rejected. Before he slowly lowered it, his face tightened. Taking the head of the table was a power move, a territorial aggression that stripped him of his authority in his own building. We are not here for drinks, Mr. Ashmore, Julian said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. We are here to discuss the $50 million you owe my client. Preston cleared his throat and sat down in a side chair. Caleb scrambled to sit next to him, looking like a child seeking protection from a parent who could not even protect himself. Right, Preston said, forcing a tight smile. The debt. Look, Julian. Can I call you Julian? We were surprised to hear about the transfer. We have had a long relationship with First City Bank. We were just about to close a refinancing deal with them when this happened. I laughed softly in my office. He was lying. There was no refinancing deal. Tell him the bank sold the debt because he is toxic. I instructed. Cut the small talk. My client acquired your debt because First City Bank classified it as a non-performing asset, Julian said, repeating my sentiment but polishing it with legal glaze. They wanted out. Nemesis Holdings wanted in. And now, we are calling the note. Caleb leaned forward, trying to summon the arrogance he had displayed on stage on Saturday. Now wait a minute, Caleb said, flashing his teeth. You cannot just call a note like that. We have rights. We have a grace period. And frankly, we have friends. I do not know if you know who I am engaged to, but her father is Senator Vance. He sits on the banking committee. I do not think your client wants to start a war with someone who can audit your entire existence. I rolled my eyes. The senator card. Predictable. Crush him, I whispered. Julian turned his head slowly to look at Caleb. He looked at him with the kind of bored curiosity a scientist might have for a lab rat that was trying to do algebra. Mr. Thorne, isn't it? Julian asked, deliberately getting his last name wrong. Or is it Mr. Ashmore to be? It is hard to keep track of the nepotism flowchart. Caleb flushed crimson. It is Caleb, and I am the vice president. Julian opened his folio. Caleb, if you think a senator is going to intervene in a private commercial debt enforcement action involving a company that is technically insolvent, you are more naive than your resume suggests. In fact, if I were to call the senator right now and show him your current balance sheet, do you think the wedding would still be on for June? Caleb's mouth snapped shut. The threat was precise. It targeted his lifeline. Preston intervened, sensing that his attack dog had just been neutered. All right. Let us not get heated, Preston said. Holding up his hands, he leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Look, Julian, we are all men of the world here. I know how these funds work. Nemesis Holdings wants a return. I get it, but destroying us does not get you paid. Liquidating our assets will take years in court. Preston reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a white envelope. He slid it across the mahogany table toward Julian. There is $20,000 in there, Preston said softly. Just a retainer, a consulting fee for you, to help us navigate this. Maybe you can go back to your client and tell them that after a thorough review, you recommend a 12-month extension. We just need time to get the logistics platform to version 2.0. I stared at the screen. He was trying to bribe my lawyer. He was actually trying to buy Julian Blackwood with $20,000. It was insulting. It was pathetic. It showed just how small Preston Ashmore had become. Tell him the price of his soul is too low, I said. Julian looked at the envelope. He did not touch it. He looked at Preston with pure disgust. Mr. Ashmore, Julian said, his voice icy. If you slide that envelope 1 inch closer, I will add a bribery charge to the lawsuit I am preparing to file this afternoon. Do not mistake me for the zoning inspectors you are used to paying off. Preston snatched the envelope back, his hands shaking slightly. Fine. What do you want? Julian clasped his hands on the table. The terms are simple, Julian said. You currently owe $50 million in principal, plus accrued interest and penalties. My client is demanding full repayment within 72 hours. 72 hours, Caleb shouted. That is impossible. We cannot raise that kind of cash in 3 days. You know that. We do know that, Julian replied calmly, which is why my client has authorized an alternative. I leaned into the microphone. Here comes the noose. We are willing to offer a forbearance agreement, Julian said. We will extend the maturity date of the loan by 3 months. This will give you the quarter to launch your software. Close your deals and find new financing. Preston let out a breath, his shoulders sagging in relief. 3 months. Okay, we can work with 3 months. We have the IPO revenue coming online. We have the government contracts pending. 3 months is a lifetime. I watched him relax. He thought he had won. He thought he had negotiated. There is a condition, Julian added. Preston paused. What condition? To grant this extension, Julian said, sliding a document across the table. "My client requires you to sign a confession of judgment." Preston picked up the document. He frowned. "I know what this is." "For the benefit of the vice president," Julian said, glancing at Caleb. "Let me explain. A confession of judgment is a legal instrument where you accept liability in advance. You agree that you owe the money. You waive your right to a trial. You waive your right to a defense. You waive your right to notice. If you miss a single payment, or if you violate a single covenant of the loan, my client can take this document to the court clerk, get a judgment entered instantly, and seize your assets that same afternoon. No judge, no jury, no delay." "It is a suicide pact," Caleb whispered. "Preston, we cannot sign that. If we sign that, they can shut us down whenever they want." Preston looked at the paper. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was terrified. Yes, but his arrogance was fighting back. He believed in his own hype. He believed that in 3 months he would be rich again. He believed he would never default. "It is standard for high-risk restructuring," Preston said, mostly to himself. "It is just paper. Caleb, as long as we pay, they cannot use it." Preston looked at Julian. "Is this the only way?" "It is the only offer on the table," Julian said. 72 hours to pay $50 million, or you sign the confession and get 90 days to breathe." Preston picked up his pen. He was going to do it. He was going to bet the company. "Wait," I said into the headset. "Not yet. Tighten the screws. I want their skin in the game." "Julian, add the writer," I commanded. Julian cleared his throat just as Preston's pen hovered over the paper. "There is one more thing," Julian said. Preston looked up, annoyed. "What now?" "Given the volatility of the company's assets," Julian said smoothly, "Nemesis Holdings requires additional collateral to secure the forbearance. The corporate assets are not enough. We need a personal guarantee." A silence descended on the room so heavy it felt like the air pressure had dropped. "A personal guarantee," Preston repeated slowly. "Yes," Julian said. "This confession of judgment will apply not just to Ashmore Dynamics, but to Preston Ashmore and Caleb Thorne as individuals. If the company defaults, you are personally liable for the $50 million, your homes, your cars, your investment portfolios, your retirement accounts. Everything you own becomes the property of Nemesis Holdings." "No," Caleb stood up, knocking his chair back. "Absolutely not. I am not signing that. I am an employee. I have a wedding coming up. I have a life. I am not betting my future on this." Preston looked at Caleb. He saw the fear. He saw the hesitation, and he hated it. He hated it because it mirrored his own fear. And Preston Ashmore despised weakness. "Sit down, Caleb," Preston growled. "I will not," Caleb argued. "This is insane. Preston, this guy is trying to strip us naked. If we sign this and the software launch fails, we are homeless." "The software will not fail," Preston shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "The software is brilliant. It is the Ashmore legacy. Do you have no faith in this family? Do you have no faith in me?" "It is not about faith," Caleb pleaded. "It is about risk. You want the reward, you take the risk." Preston sneered. "You want the vice president title. You want the salary. You want the senator's daughter. You think you got those things because you are special. You got them because you are with me. Now, when the water gets rough, you want to jump ship." I watched the dynamic shift. Preston was bullying him. He was using shame and dominance to force Caleb into the trap. It was exactly what I had counted on. Preston's ego demanded total loyalty, even if it meant mutual destruction. "If you walk out of this room without signing," Preston said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, "you are fired. You lose the title. You lose the salary. And I will personally call Senator Vance and tell him that you are a coward who abandoned his post during a crisis. Do you think he will let you marry his daughter then?" Caleb froze. He looked at Julian, who sat impassively like a stone idol. He looked at Preston, whose face was purple with rage. He looked at the door. He was trapped. If he left, He lost his fiancée and his career. If he stayed and signed, he kept the illusion alive for 3 more months. Caleb was a gambler who always chased his losses. I knew which way he would break. Caleb slowly picked up his chair and sat down. He looked defeated. He looked small. "Fine," Caleb whispered. "I will sign." Julian pushed the document toward them. He took a Mont Blanc pen from his pocket, a pen I had given him specifically for this moment, and laid it on the paper. "Signatures on page 40, Julian said, "and initial the writers on page 42. Preston signed first. He slashed his signature across the page with an aggressive flourish, as if by signing hard enough, he could intimidate the paper into submission. He believed he was saving his empire. He had no idea he was signing his own eviction notice. He pushed the paper to Caleb. Caleb's hand shook. He hesitated for a long second, the pen hovering over the line. "Do it," Preston commanded. Caleb signed. It was a small, cramped signature, the mark of a man who knew he was making a mistake, but was too weak to stop himself. Julian took the document back. He checked the signatures. He checked the initials. He closed the folio. "Thank you. Gentlemen," Julian said, standing up, "the forbearance is in effect. You have 90 days. He did not say good luck. He did not say goodbye. He turned and walked out of the room. I watched Preston and Caleb on the screen. They did not speak. They just sat there, staring at the empty space where the document had been. The silence was deafening. They had just bought themselves time, but they had paid for it with their lives. I leaned back in my chair and pulled the headset off. My heart was not racing. My hands were not shaking. I felt a cold, calm satisfaction. The noose was not just around their necks anymore. It was around their homes, their cars, their futures, and the best part was, they had put it there themselves. I picked up my phone and sent a text to my broker. "Short the stock," I wrote, "all of it." Then I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting long shadows across the city. Somewhere down there, in the belly of the beast, Julian was getting into his car with the signed confession. "The trap is set," I whispered to the glass. "Now, we wait for them to trip the wire." And I knew exactly how to make them trip. It was time to introduce a little volatility into their carefully planned 3 months. It was time to bring the ghosts out of the closet. Revenge is often depicted as a crime of passion, a hot, screaming thing that happens in the heat of the moment. But true revenge, the kind that leaves a crater where a life used to be, is a cold, administrative process. It is about paperwork. It is about timing. And most of all, it is about knowing exactly which pillar to kick to bring the whole temple down on top of the Philistines. It was Thursday. According to the forbearance agreement Preston and Caleb had signed 3 days ago, they believed they had 90 days of breathing room. They thought they had 3 months to fix their broken software, charm new investors, and wiggle out of the noose I had placed around their necks. They were sleeping soundly again, arrogant in their belief that they had outsmarted the faceless corporation known as Nemesis Holdings. I decided to wake them up. I sat in my office, a cup of black coffee steaming on the granite desk. On my screen, I had a drafted email open. It was addressed to Elena Vance, Caleb's fiancée, and copied to her father, Senator Marcus Vance. The subject line was simple: due diligence. Attached to the email were 12 high-resolution photographs and 3 audio recordings. They were not hard to acquire. Caleb was a creature of habit, and his habit was infidelity. He had been seeing a hostess from a club in the Gold Coast district for the past 6 months, using the corporate credit card to pay for her apartment. The photos were explicit, undeniable, and dated as recently as last Tuesday, 2 days after he had proposed to Elena on stage. I did not feel guilt. Elena was innocent, yes, but she was about to marry a cancer. Cutting him out of her life now was a kindness. Even if the surgery was brutal, I hovered my finger over the enter key. For 7 years, Caleb had used people. He used me to get his promotion. He used Elena to get political cover. He thought people were just rungs on a ladder. Today, I was going to grease the rungs. I pressed send. The effect was not immediate, but the anticipation was delicious. I imagined the notification pinging on Elena's phone. I imagined the confusion, then the horror, then the rage. I imagined the senator's face turning that shade of purple he usually reserved for tax hikes. 2 hours later, the fallout arrived at Ashmore Dynamics. I was watching the security feed. Caleb was sitting in his office, feet up on the desk, looking at wedding venues on his iPad. Suddenly, his door flew open. He jumped, dropping the tablet. It was not Elena. It was his assistant, looking pale and terrified. "Mr. Thorne," she stammered. "Senator Vance is on line 1. He is screaming, and security just called from the lobby. Miss Vance is here, and she threw her engagement ring at the front desk attendant and told him to burn it." Caleb's face went white. He scrambled for the phone. "Senator," Caleb began, his voice trembling. I could not hear the other side of the call, but I did not need to. Caleb pulled the phone away from his ear as if it had burned him. He stared at the receiver in disbelief. Then he slammed it down and ran out of the office. I switched the camera view to Preston's office. Caleb burst in, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. "It is over," Caleb shouted. "It is all over. Elena called off the wedding. The senator said if I ever contact her again, he will have me investigated by the IRS, the FBI, and the NSA. Preston looked up from his papers, his eyes narrowing. "What did you do, you idiot?" "I did nothing," Caleb cried. "Someone sent them photos. Someone sent them everything. My emails, the hotel receipts. Preston, they know about the apartment. They know everything." Preston stood up slowly. He walked around the desk and slapped Caleb across the face. The sound was sharp and final. "You reckless fool," Preston hissed. "You were supposed to be the safety net. You were supposed to be the political cover. Now you are just another liability." "I am not a liability," Caleb screamed, holding his cheek. "Someone is targeting us. Do you not see it? First the debt. Now this. This is not a coincidence. Someone is trying to kill us." Preston went to the window, looking out at the city he used to think he owned. He was beginning to see the shape of the trap, but he was too slow. While they were screaming at each other, I initiated Phase 2. I picked up my phone and called a contact at the Financial Times. He was a journalist I had fed stories to before, a man who loved a scandal more than he loved his own children. "I have a tip," I said. "What is it, Liliana?" he asked. "Ashmore Dynamics," I said. "They just signed a confession of judgment with a distress fund. They are technically insolvent. The liquidity crisis is worse than the street thinks. And the vice president just lost his political backing because of an embezzlement scandal involving a mistress." "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am looking at the documents right now." I lied smoothly. "Run it." 30 minutes later, the headline hit the wire service's Ashmore Dynamics. Teetering insolvency rumors swirl as Vance wedding implodes. The market reaction was instantaneous and violent. I watched the stock ticker on my second monitor. Ashmore Dynamics opened at $12 a share. By noon, it was trading at $8. By 2 in the afternoon, it had crashed to $4.50. The plummeting stock price did exactly what I knew it would do. It devalued the company's assets. The margin calls started coming in from other minor lenders. Suppliers who read the news started canceling deliveries, demanding cash up front. The cash flow, which was already a trickle, stopped completely. And then, the trap snapped shut. According to the covenant in Clause 14b, the one Julian and I had buried in the forbearance agreement, the borrower was required to maintain a liquidity ratio of 1.5. With the stock crash and the sudden freeze in credit, their ratio had just dropped to 0.8. They were in default. I did not call them. I did not send a lawyer. I just let them sit in the burning building for a while. Back in Preston's office, the atmosphere had shifted from panic to a cold, deadly realization. Preston was no longer shouting. He was sitting behind his desk, staring at a report his private investigator had just faxed over. He had hired the investigator the moment the debt was sold, trying to find out who was behind Nemesis Holdings and Vanguard Capital. He wanted to know who had bought his life. Caleb was pouring himself a drink, his hand shaking so badly the scotch was splashing onto the carpet. "It does not make sense," Caleb muttered. Vanguard Capital appeared out of nowhere. Elias Thorne is the face, but he has been out of the game for years. He does not have this kind of capital. Who is backing him? Preston did not answer. He was reading the facts. The investigator had done a deep dive. He had peeled back the layers of shell companies. He had traced the IP address of the initial debt purchase. He had found the notary who stamped the incorporation papers of Vanguard Capital 7 years ago. Preston dropped the paper on the desk. His face was gray, the color of old ash. "It is not a stranger," Preston whispered. "What?" Caleb asked, turning around. Preston looked at Caleb, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of bankruptcy, fear of the supernatural, fear of a ghost. "It is Liliana," Preston said. Caleb laughed. It was a nervous, hysterical sound. "Liliana, your daughter, the girl who cried because she broke a nail. Preston. She is probably waiting tables in Ohio. She does not have $50 million. She does not have the brain for this." Preston pushed the facts toward him. "Read the name on the notary block for the LLC," Preston said, "and look at the signature on the original funding document. It is L. Ashmore, and the address, it is the old apartment building on the south side. The one she—" Preston stopped. He remembered. He remembered the only time I had ever defied him. 7 years ago, when I told him I would buy his light and turn it off. I watched them on the screen. I saw the moment the truth hit Caleb. He picked up the paper. He read it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Liliana," Caleb whispered. She did this. She bought the debt." "She owns us," Preston said, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rage. "All of it. The restructuring, the forbearance, the Clause 14B. It was all her. She has been watching us. She sent the photos to the senator. She leaked the story to the press." Caleb collapsed into a chair. 7 years, he said. "We thought she was dead, or gone, and she was building this." I leaned closer to the screen, waiting. I was waiting for the remorse. I was waiting for Preston to say, "My God, what have I done to my own child?" I was waiting for Caleb to say, "I should have protected her." But I had underestimated their capacity for evil. Preston's shock dissolved, replaced by a dark, twisting fury. He slammed his fist onto the desk. "That ungrateful little brat," Preston roared. "After everything I gave her, the clothes, the education, the life, I gave her everything. And this is how she repays me. She steals my company. She humiliates us. She is vicious," Caleb spat, his fear turning into hatred. "She ruined my life today. Preston, she destroyed my marriage. She is not a victim. She is a monster. She thinks she can beat me." Preston stood up, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "She thinks because she has some money and a fancy lawyer she can come back here and dictate terms to me. I am Preston Ashmore. I built this city while she was playing with dolls." "What do we do?" Caleb asked. "She has the confession of judgment. She can seize everything tomorrow." "We fight dirty," Preston said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "She wants a war. We will give her a war. She thinks she is untouchable because she is the creditor. But she has a weak spot." Caleb looked at him. What weak spot? "The child," Preston said. My blood ran cold. I sat up straight in my chair, my hand instinctively going to my throat. "The bastard she was pregnant with," Preston continued. "It must be 6 or 7 years old now. If she is in Chicago, the child is in Chicago." "So what?" Caleb asked. "So," Preston smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. "We are the family. I am the grandfather. You are the father. We have rights." Caleb shook his head. "I do not want the kid." "Preston." "You do not need to want it," Preston snapped. "You just need to take it. If we file for emergency custody, claiming she is an unfit mother, a corporate raider, unstable, vindictive, we can tie her up in family court for months. We can get an emergency order. If we have the child, we have leverage. Leverage, Caleb repeated, testing the word. We tell her, Preston said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You drop the debt. You forgive the loans, or you never see your daughter again. Caleb's face changed. The fear vanished, replaced by a sick, hopeful grin. He nodded. She loves that kid, Caleb said. She walked out into a blizzard for it. She will do anything to keep it. Exactly, Preston said. Get the lawyers on the phone, not the corporate lawyers, the family lawyers, the sharks who handle divorces. Tell them we want an ex parte order. Tell them the mother is mentally unstable and a danger to the child. Make up whatever you have to. I want that child in my custody by tomorrow night. I stared at the screen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so pure, so white-hot, that I thought it might set the room on fire. They were not sorry. They did not care that I had survived. They did not care that I had built an empire. All they saw was another asset to be exploited. All they saw was a child to be used as a bargaining chip. They were going to come for Stella. I reached for my phone. I dialed the number for the head of my security detail, a former Navy SEAL named Marcus. Marcus, I said, my voice deadly calm. Yes, Ms. Ashmore. Pull Stella from school, I ordered. Now, take her to the safe house. Put 3 men on the perimeter. No one gets in. No one gets out. Is there a threat, ma'am? Yes, I said, watching my father and my ex-boyfriend plotting on the screen. The threat is immediate. And Marcus? Yes. If anyone named Ashmore or Thorne comes near her, I said, you have authorization to use lethal force. Understood. I hung up. I looked back at the screen. Preston and Caleb were shaking hands, congratulating themselves on their brilliance. They thought they had found the ace in the hole. They had no idea. They thought they were fighting a business rival. They thought they were fighting a daughter. But they had just declared war on a mother. I stood up and walked to the wall safe. I punched in the code, and the heavy steel door swung open. Inside was a thick black binder labeled, "The Nuclear Option." I had hoped I would not have to use it. I had hoped that taking their money would be enough. But they wanted to play God. They wanted to touch my child. I took the binder out and threw it onto my desk. You want to play dirty, Father, I whispered. You want to talk about unfit parents. I opened the binder. Inside were the unredacted medical records from the unauthorized clinical trials Ashmore Dynamics had run in third world countries 10 years ago. The trials that had killed people. The trials Preston had buried. I had found them in the encrypted server archives. I had saved them for the end. Tomorrow, I was not just going to take his company, I was going to send him to federal prison for the rest of his miserable life. I checked my watch. It was 5 in the afternoon. One more night, I said. Enjoy your last night of freedom, because tomorrow, the ghosts are coming to eat you alive. There is a special circle in hell reserved for men who use children as currency. I had spent the last 7 years thinking that my father and my ex-boyfriend were merely greedy, selfish cowards. I thought their sins were limited to the boardroom and the bank account. I was wrong. As I sat in the darkness of my command center, watching the high-definition feed from Preston's office, I realized that I had not yet seen the bottom of their depravity. They were not just willing to steal my money, they were willing to steal my heart, rip it out of my chest, and hold it for ransom. The plan was hatched over a bottle of scotch that cost $600. The sun had set outside, turning the office windows into black mirrors, reflecting their desperate faces. Preston was pacing, the adrenaline of the cornered animal fueling his manic energy. Caleb sat slumped in a chair, still reeling from the destruction of his engagement. But his eyes were beginning to gleam with a new, malicious hope. She has a weakness, Preston said, stopping in front of the wet bar. Every woman has a weakness, and for Liliana, it is not money, it is the brat. Caleb nodded slowly. Stella. She is 7 now. I saw a picture of her once on social media before Liliana scrubbed everything. She looks just like me. Preston swirled his drink. That is our ticket. Caleb, Biology is a powerful thing in the eyes of the law. You are the biological father. I am the grandfather. We have rights. Rights that supersede some debt collection agency. But I abandoned her, Caleb said, his voice wavering with a sliver of doubt. I signed away my rights at the hospital, no, I never signed anything. I just left. Exactly, Preston snapped, pointing a finger at him. You never signed a termination of parental rights. You just failed to establish paternity. That is a rectifiable error. If we go to family court tomorrow morning, we can file an emergency petition. We can claim you were coerced. We can claim Liliana hid the child from you. Caleb frowned, but she did not hide her. She asked me to stay, and I walked away. History is written by the winners. Caleb, Preston said with a sneer, and right now, we need to win. We need leverage. If we have custody of the girl, Liliana will freeze. She will not foreclose on the company if it means dragging her daughter through a custody war. She will rip up that confession of judgment with her own teeth to get the kid back. I watched my father pour another drink. My hands were gripping the edge of my desk so hard that my knuckles were white. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. They were discussing the abduction of my daughter with the same casual tone they used to discuss a hostile takeover. How do we get custody fast enough? Caleb asked. The debt deadline is Friday. Family court takes months. Not if it is an emergency, Preston said. He reached for his phone. I know a lawyer, a specialist in high-conflict dissolutions. His name is Finch. He is a snake, but he is our snake. We need an ex parte order. I knew what an ex parte order was. It was a legal nuclear weapon. It allowed a judge to make a ruling without the other party being present. Usually in cases of extreme danger or abuse, it was designed to protect battered wives and children. They were planning to weaponize it against a protective mother. Preston dialed the number. I listened as he summoned the lawyer, offering a retainer of $15,000 cash to be delivered by courier within the hour. 40 minutes later, Finch arrived. He was a small, oily man with a suit that looked expensive but fit poorly. He sat at the table, listening as Preston outlined the objective. You want immediate temporary custody, Finch said, his voice scratching like sandpaper. To do that without a hearing, you need to prove immediate danger. You need to prove that the child is in imminent physical or emotional peril in the mother's care. She is a corporate raider, Preston said. She is obsessed with revenge. She is unstable. That is not enough for a judge, Finch said, tapping his pen on a yellow legal pad. Being a shark in business does not make you an unfit mother. We need pathology. We need a history of mental illness, drug use, neglect. The room fell silent. Caleb looked at Preston. Preston looked at Caleb. Then, Preston opened his desk drawer. She was emotional when she was a teenager. Preston lied smoothly. She had episodes, mood swings. Finch looked up. Can you document that? Preston looked at Caleb. You lived with her for 2 years. Caleb, did you not say she suffered from severe depression? Did you not say she was erratic? Caleb hesitated. He knew it was a lie. I had been the rock in our relationship. I had managed the bills, the schedule, and his ego while he played executive. But he also knew that his life was on the line. Yes, Caleb said, his voice dropping to a whisper. She was unstable. She had postpartum depression after the baby was born. She called me, screaming, threatening to hurt herself, threatening to hurt the baby. That is why I stayed away. I was afraid of triggering her. I gasped in the empty silence of my office. The lie was so monstrous, so inverted from the truth of those lonely nights I spent holding Stella, promising her the world, that it felt like a physical slap. Caleb, who had not even called to ask if the baby survived the birth, was now claiming he stayed away to protect us. Good, Finch said, writing furiously. That is good. We can draft an affidavit. Father claims mother has history of untreated postpartum psychosis and has made recent threats regarding the child's safety in response to financial stress. Financial stress, Preston added. Make sure you put that in. She is under pressure from her investors. She is acting irrationally. We believe she might flee the country with the child to avoid her creditors. We need the order to prevent flight." Finch nodded. "I can work with this. I will draft the petition tonight. We will present it to Judge Holloway first thing in the morning. Holloway owes me a favor. If I attach a sworn affidavit from the biological father and the grandfather attesting to her instability, he will sign the temporary order." "And then what?" Caleb asked. "Then the sheriff executes the order." Finch said, "They pick up the child from school or home and deliver her to you. Liliana will not even know it is happening until the police knock on her door. By then, the girl is in your house, and you have the upper hand." Preston leaned back, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Perfect. Once we have the girl, we call Liliana. We tell her if she wants to see Stella before she is 18. She signs a release on the debt and hands over the equity in Vanguard Capital." "It is a trade," Caleb said, finding his courage in the cruelty. "Her company for her kid." I stopped watching. I could not stomach another second of it. I stood up and walked to the window. My reflection in the glass looked calm, but inside, a dam had broken. For 7 years, I had operated with cold, calculated logic. I had treated this as a business transaction, but they had just crossed the line from business into warfare. They had targeted the innocent. I did not feel fear. Fear is for people who have something to lose. I had already lost everything once. Now, I was the one holding the cards. They thought they were the predators, setting a trap for a hysterical woman. They had no idea they were poking a sleeping dragon. I picked up my secure phone. I dialed Marcus, my head of security. "Status?" I asked. "Target is secure," Marcus replied instantly. "We extracted Stella from the private school 20 minutes ago, per your previous order. She is at the safe house in Lake Forest. 2 teams on the perimeter. The windows are bulletproof. The nanny is with her, watching cartoons. She thinks it is a surprise vacation." "Good," I said. "Listen to me carefully, Marcus. The threat level has just escalated to critical." "What is the vector?" Marcus asked. "Legal abduction," I said. "They are filing for an ex parte custody order tomorrow morning based on falsified affidavits. They are going to send the sheriff to the school and to my apartment." "Do we need to move her out of state?" "No," I said. "That would look like flight. That would support their lie. Keep her at the safe house. It is a private trust property, not listed in my name. The sheriff cannot serve a warrant at a location he does not know exists. If anyone, and I mean anyone, including law enforcement, tries to breach that perimeter without my direct voice authorization, you lock it down. You are a private security contractor on private property. You hold the line." "Understood," Marcus said. "We are a fortress. Ms. Ashmore." I hung up. Stella was safe. Now, I needed to destroy the weapon they were trying to use. I walked back to my desk and opened the biometric safe built into the drawer. Inside sat a single, thick black folder. I had labeled it, "The Liability." I had spent 7 years gathering information, not just financial data, but personal filth. I knew where the skeletons were buried because I had paid the people who dug the graves. I opened the file on Caleb Thorne. It was a masterpiece of forensic investigation. It contained more than just the affair with the senator's daughter. It contained the records of his online gambling accounts, showing losses of over $200,000 in the last year alone. It contained the Venmo transactions to a known drug dealer in the West Loop payments for party favors that Caleb used to fuel his late nights. But the centerpiece was a police report from 3 years ago, a hit and run in a rental car. Caleb had struck a parked car while intoxicated and fled the scene. Preston had paid the police chief of that small suburb $10,000 to bury the report and destroy the breathalyzer results. But my investigator had found the original digital copy on the server before it was wiped. This was not just embarrassment. This was a felony. This was proof of a criminal record that had been expunged through bribery. And then there was Preston. I flipped to the second section of the file. The medical records from the fraudulent clinical trials were damning. Yes, but I needed something that would destroy his credibility in family court specifically. I found it in the transcripts of his therapy sessions. Preston had seen a psychiatrist 5 years ago, during the height of a previous financial crisis. I had bought the notes from a disgruntled receptionist at the clinic. In those notes, Preston admitted to violent urges toward his subordinates. He admitted to a total lack of empathy. He was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder with sociopathic tendencies. They wanted to prove I was unstable. I was about to prove they were monsters. I sat down and began to scan the documents into a single, encrypted PDF. I pulled up my email client. I drafted a message to Julian Blackwood. Subject: the kill switch. Julian, they are filing for an ex parte custody order tomorrow morning at 9. Judge Holloway, they are submitting perjured affidavits claiming I am mentally unstable and dangerous. They are using this to blackmail me into forgiving the debt. Attached is the rebuttal. File A. Caleb Thorne's suppressed hit-and-run police report, his gambling debts, and proof of drug purchases. This proves he is a criminal and an addict. File B. Preston Ashmore's psychiatric evaluation diagnosing him as a sociopath. File C. A sworn affidavit from Stella's pediatrician and her school principal attesting to my fitness as a mother and Stella's perfect health and safety record. Do not file these yet. Let them walk into the courtroom. Let them submit their lies to the judge. Let them swear under oath that these lies are true. Once they have committed perjury on the record, I want you to walk in. I want you to drop this file on the judge's bench. And then I want you to ask for an immediate arrest warrant for perjury and attempted kidnapping by fraud. Accelerate the timeline. We are not waiting for Friday. We are finishing them tomorrow. I hit send. The email swooshed away. A digital missile headed for the heart of their conspiracy. I leaned back in my chair, the adrenaline slowly fading into a cold, hard resolve. They had tried to use the law as a sword to cut me. They did not realize that I had spent 7 years forging a shield out of their own secrets. They wanted a family reunion. They wanted to assert their rights as father and grandfather. Tomorrow, they would get their reunion, but it would not be in a nursery. It would be in a courtroom, and I would be the one holding the gavel. I looked at the picture of Stella on my desk. She was smiling, holding an ice cream cone, innocent and safe. They will never touch you, I whispered, not while I have breath in my body, and not while I have enough leverage to bury them under the jail. The sun had fully set now. The city lights were twinkling below. Indifferent to the war being waged in the sky, I turned off the monitors. I did not need to watch them anymore. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were celebrating. They were drinking their scotch, toasting to their brilliance, believing they had checkmated the Vulture Queen. Sleep tight, boys, I said to the darkness, because when you wake up, the nightmare begins. The conference room on the 45th floor of the Vanguard Capitol building was designed for one purpose, and that purpose was psychological warfare. I had commissioned the architecture myself. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a vertigo-inducing view of the Chicago skyline that made lesser men feel small and insignificant against the vastness of the city. The floor was polished concrete, cold and unforgiving. The table was a single slab of brushed steel, 20 feet long, reflecting the gray sky outside like a frozen lake. There was no art on the walls to distract the eye. There was no warmth. And today, I had instructed the building manager to lower the thermostat to 62 degrees. It was not freezing, but it was uncomfortable. It was the kind of chill that seeped through layers of wool and silk, settling into the bones, making it impossible to relax. It was the temperature of a morgue. I sat at the head of the steel table, my high-backed leather chair turned away from the door. I was facing the window, looking out at the storm clouds gathering over Lake Michigan. It was fitting. The weather always seemed to know when an Ashmore was about to face judgment. I checked the time on my watch. It was 2 p.m. They were late. Preston Ashmore used lateness as a power move. He believed that making someone wait was a subtle way of establishing dominance, of saying that his time was more valuable than yours. He did not know that I was charging him interest on every second he wasted. Finally, the heavy soundproof doors hissed open. I did not turn around. I listened to their footsteps, Preston's stride was heavy, authoritative, the heel strikes of a man who believed the ground should be grateful to support him. Caleb's steps were lighter, quicker, a nervous staccato that betrayed his anxiety despite his bravado. They stopped near the foot of the table. I could hear the rustle of fabric as they took off their coats, likely shivering slightly from the sudden drop in temperature. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Preston's voice boomed. It echoed off the glass walls, stripping away the warmth he tried to inject into it. I waited a full 10 seconds before responding. I wanted them to feel the silence. I wanted them to feel the weight of the room pressing down on them. Then, I reached out and tapped the button on the armrest of my chair. The electric motor whirred softly, and I spun around slowly to face them. The reaction was immediate and satisfying. For 7 years, Preston and Caleb had held an image of me frozen in their minds, to them. I was still the 21-year-old girl in a thrift store coat, shivering, pregnant, and begging for help with tears running down a blotchy face. They remembered a victim. They remembered a liability. What they saw now was something entirely different. I was wearing a tailored white suit that cost more than Caleb's car. My hair, once wild and unmanageable, was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon that highlighted the sharp angles of my face. My makeup was minimal, emphasizing eyes that had lost all traces of naivety. I sat with my spine perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly on the steel table. I did not look like a daughter. I looked like a CEO. I looked like a judge. Preston's mouth opened slightly, then snapped shut. He blinked, as if trying to reconcile the memory with the reality. Caleb just stared, his eyes widening as he took in the transformation. He looked at the office, the view, the expensive furniture, and then back at me. I saw the calculation happening in his eyes. He was realizing that the ghost he had mocked was real, and she was wealthy. Preston was the first to recover. His arrogance was a reflex, a shield he had worn for 40 years. He forced a smile that did not reach his eyes, a condescending smirk that made my skin crawl. Well, Preston said, taking a step forward. "Look at you. You certainly cleaned up nice. Liliana?" I did not smile back. I stared at him with the impassive gaze of a reptile. "Sit down," I said. My voice was low, calm, and commanded absolute obedience. Preston bristled at the tone, but he pulled out a metal chair and sat. The metal was cold against his suit. Caleb sat next to him, placing a leather briefcase on the table with a protective hand. "So," Preston said, leaning back and crossing his legs, trying to look at ease in the freezing room. "Nemesis Holdings, Vanguard Capital. I have to admit, I am impressed. You went to some lengths to hide your name. I suppose you wanted the dramatic reveal." "I wanted efficiency," I corrected him. "Names are distractions. Numbers are the only truth." Preston chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "You always did like to play games. Remember when you were 10 and you set up that lemonade stand? You thought you were a businesswoman then, too." He was trying to diminish me. He was trying to drag me back to childhood, to frame this entire hostile takeover as a tantrum of a spoiled daughter. "I am not playing games. Father," I said, "I am collecting a debt." Preston waved his hand dismissively. "The debt. Yes, we know about the debt. $50 million. It is a lot of money for a little girl. But let us be honest. Liliana, you are out of your depth. You bought the paper. Fine. You scared us a little. Bravo. But now the adults are in the room, and it is time to stop pretending you can run with the wolves." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a patronizing purr. "Playing shop is over. Liliana, you have had your fun. You proved your point. Now, let us talk about how we are going to fix this family mess you created." I looked at him, feeling a profound sense of pity mixed with disgust. He truly did not get it. He was standing on the gallows, and he thought he was at a negotiation table. "I am not here to fix the family," I said. "I am here to liquidate it." Caleb slammed his hand on the table. The noise was sharp, like a gunshot in the quiet room. He had found his courage, fueled by the document inside his briefcase, and the desperation of a man who had lost his fiancée and his reputation in 48 hours. "Liquidate us," Caleb spat, his face flushing red. "You think you can just snap your fingers and destroy us? You think because you have some money you can ruin my life? You destroyed my engagement. Liliana, you humiliated me." "You humiliated yourself," I said calmly. "I just provided the documentation." "You are a vindictive bitch," Caleb shouted. Preston put a hand on Caleb's arm to silence him. He looked at me with cold, hard eyes. "We are not here to trade insults," Preston said. "We are here to offer you a deal, a way out." I raised an eyebrow. "A way out? For whom?" "For you," Preston said, "because if you proceed with this foreclosure, if you try to enforce that confession of judgment, you are going to lose the only thing you actually care about." He nodded to Caleb. Caleb opened his briefcase. His hands were shaking slightly, but he pulled out a thick stack of legal papers stapled together with a blue cover sheet. He threw them across the steel table. They slid across the smooth surface and stopped inches from my hand. I looked down. The text was bold and black. Emergency petition for temporary custody. Petitioner, Caleb Thorne. Respondent, Liliana Ashmore. Subject, Stella Ashmore, minor child. I did not touch the papers. I just looked at them. "What is this?" I asked, though I knew exactly what it was. "That," Caleb said, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction, "is a court order, or at least, it will be by tomorrow morning. We filed an emergency ex parte petition with the family court today. We submitted affidavits, sworn affidavits, detailing your history of mental instability, your erratic behavior, your vindictive nature. We painted a very clear picture for the judge," Preston added, smiling cruelly. "A picture of a woman so obsessed with revenge that she is a danger to her own child. A woman who drags her daughter through poverty and then uses her ill-gotten gains to attack her own family. The courts do not like instability." "Liliana," Caleb said, "and they love biology. I am the father. Preston is the grandfather. We have a stable home. We have status. You have a shell company and a grudge." I looked up from the papers to their faces. They looked triumphant. They looked like they had just played an ace. "You are blackmailing me," I stated flatly. "We are negotiating," Preston corrected. "Here are the terms. You will sign a release of the debt. You will forgive the $50 million fully and irrevocably. You will transfer the ownership of the Ashmore Dynamics debt back to the company for $1. And you will resign from any interference in our business." "And if I do not?" I asked. "Then we take Stella," Caleb said. He leaned over the table, his eyes wide and manic. "We will take her. Liliana. The sheriff will pick her up. She will come live with me. And given your instability, I will make sure the judge grants me full custody with supervised visits only. Maybe you can see her on Christmas, if you behave." "Think about it," Preston said, leaning back and inspecting his fingernails. "Is your revenge worth losing your daughter? Is seeing me bankrupt worth having Stella grow up in my house? Listening to me tell her every day how her mother was a crazy, vindictive woman who abandoned her family?" I sat there, frozen, not with fear, as they suspected, but with the sheer effort of holding back the fury that threatened to explode out of my chest. They were threatening to gaslight my daughter. They were threatening to poison her mind against me. "And there is more," Caleb added, twisting the knife. "If you fight this, we will go public. We will tell the press everything. How you were a promiscuous party girl who got pregnant and ran away. How you slept your way to the top of this little vulture fund. We will paint you as a whore. Liliana, we will destroy your reputation so thoroughly that no bank in this city will ever do business with you again." "You are a liability," Preston said, echoing the words he had spoken 7 years ago. "And liabilities get written off. So, be a smart girl. Sign the debt forgiveness. Go back to your little life, and maybe we will let you keep the kid." The silence returned to the room. It was heavy, thick, and suffocating. The air conditioner hummed, a low, ominous drone. They sat there, waiting for me to break. They expected tears. They expected screaming. They expected me to grab the pen and sign away my empire to save my child. They did not understand that I had anticipated this moment. They did not understand that I had not just prepared a defense, I had prepared an annihilation. I looked at Preston. I looked at Caleb. I memorized their faces in this moment of hubris. I wanted to remember exactly how they looked when they thought they were gods. "You are right," I said softly. Preston smiled. "See? I knew you were smart." "You are right about one thing," I continued, my voice hardening into steel. "Biology is powerful, but evidence is stronger." I did not pick up their custody papers. I did not argue with their lies. Instead, I reached under the table and pulled out a heavy black leather binder. It was 3 inches thick. It hit the steel table with a dull, heavy thud that sounded like a coffin lid closing. I placed my hand on the cover. I looked Caleb dead in the eye. "You brought a petition to a courtroom." I said, "I brought the truth." I slid the heavy binder across the table. It spun slowly on the smooth steel, sliding past their custody papers, and came to a rest directly in front of Preston. "Open it," I commanded. Preston looked at the binder. He looked at me. The smile faded from his lips, replaced by a flicker of unease. He saw the lack of fear in my eyes. He saw the absolute, terrifying confidence of a woman who knows the outcome of the game before the dice are thrown. "What is this?" Preston asked. "It is your legacy," I said. Preston hesitated. He looked at Caleb. Caleb looked nervous. "Open it," I repeated, my voice cracking like a whip. Preston reached out his hand. His fingers brushed the leather. He flipped the cover open. The room was silent, save for the rustle of paper as Preston Ashmore stared down at the first page of his destruction. He did not know it yet, but the meeting was over. The trial had just begun, and I was the only judge that mattered. Preston stared at the open binder. His eyes were wide, fixed on the psychiatric evaluation he thought had been shredded 5 years ago. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from the water, gasping for air that was suddenly too thin to breathe. He looked at the diagnosis narcissistic personality disorder with sociopathic tendencies, and then he looked up at me. For the first time since I walked into the room, I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a reaper who had just sharpened her scythe. "You kept records," Preston whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and horror. "You stole my medical files. This is illegal. This is a violation of privacy." I leaned back in my chair, resting my elbows on the cold steel table. "You want to talk about the law, Father?" I asked, my voice cutting through the room like a razor blade. "Let us talk about the law. Specifically, let us talk about the law of unintended consequences." Caleb slammed his hand on the table again, trying to regain control of a room that was spinning rapidly out of his grasp. "We do not care about your little binder," Caleb shouted, his face flushed and sweating. "It does not matter what dirt you have. We have the court order. We have the petition. If you do not sign that debt forgiveness right now, the sheriff is going to pick up Stella. We win. Liliana, do you hear me? We win." I laughed. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh that echoed off the glass walls. It was the sound of total, absolute victory. "You think you are here to negotiate," I said, shaking my head. "You poor, stupid men. You think this is a meeting. You think there is a deal on the table." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my white suit. "I did not bring you here to negotiate," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I brought you here to witness the execution." "What are you talking about?" Preston snapped, closing the binder as if hiding the truth would make it disappear. I pointed to the digital clock on the wall. It read 2:15 in the afternoon. At 9 o'clock this morning, when the markets opened, a rumor hit the wire that Ashmore Dynamics was insolvent, I explained, walking slowly around the table toward them. By 9:30, your stock had dropped 12%. By 10 o'clock, it crossed the threshold of 15%. I stopped directly behind Preston's chair. I leaned down, close enough to smell the fear sweating out of his pores. "Do you remember the confession of judgment you signed on Monday?" I asked softly. "Do you remember the liquidity covenant, Clause 14B? Preston froze. His head snapped up. The covenant stated that if the company's valuation dropped by more than 15% in a single trading session, the debt was immediately accelerated. I said, "Not in 24 hours. Immediately." I walked back to the head of the table and pressed a button on my laptop. A document projected onto the glass wall behind me. It was a court filing, stamped with the seal of the Cook County clerk, time-stamped at 10:15 in the morning. At 10:15, my lawyers filed the confession of judgment. I announced. The court clerk entered the judgment at 10:30. I looked at them, savoring the moment. "I did not just buy your debt, Preston. I foreclosed on it. As of 4 hours ago, Ashmore Dynamics no longer belongs to you, the building we are sitting in, the factory in Ohio, the patents, the bank accounts. They are all property of Nemesis Holdings. And since I am the sole proprietor of Nemesis Holdings," I spread my arms wide. "You are sitting in my chair, you are drinking my water, and you are trespassing on my property." Preston's face went white. He stood up, his legs shaking so hard the metal chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor. "No," he stammered. "That is impossible. We have a forbearance period. We have 90 days. "You had 90 days if you maintained liquidity." I corrected him. "You failed. You are bankrupt." "Father, not next week, not tomorrow. Right now. Your corporate credit cards have already been canceled. Your security badges have been deactivated. When you walk out of this room, you will not be going back to your office because security has already boxed up your personal effects." You witch," Preston hissed. "You orchestrated the stock drop. You leaked the story." "Market forces," I said with a shrug. "I just gave them a nudge." Caleb stood up now, his eyes wild. He grabbed the custody papers he had thrown on the table. He waved them in the air like a weapon. "It does not matter," Caleb screamed. "You can take the company. Take the money. We still have the girl. You forgot about the girl. Liliana. We filed the petition this morning. The judge is signing it right now. Even if you are rich, you are going to lose her. We will trade her back to you for the company. That is the deal. Give us back the assets, or we destroy your family." He was so arrogant. He was so sure that he had found the one thing I could not buy. He thought he was holding a royal flush. He did not realize he was holding a stick of dynamite, and the fuse had already burned down to the powder. I looked at Caleb with a mixture of pity and revulsion. "You really think I would leave my daughter exposed to people like you?" I asked. I picked up a remote control from the table. "You think you are the only ones who know how to file a lawsuit?" I said. "You filed a petition based on lies. You swore under oath that I was mentally unstable. You fabricated medical records. You bribed a lawyer to draft a perjured affidavit." "So what?" Caleb sneered. "It is your word against ours, and we are two respectable businessmen against one hysterical woman. The judge will believe us." "Will he?" I asked. I pressed the button on the remote. The massive flat-screen monitor on the west wall flickered to life. It was not a slide deck. It was a live news feed from a local Chicago station. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking news FBI raid at prominent law firm." The camera was shaking slightly, zoomed in on the entrance of a building downtown. I saw men in blue jackets with yellow letters on the back swarming the entrance. FBI. Preston squinted at the screen. That is Finch's office." "Yes," I said. "That is Mr. Finch's office. Your lawyer." On the screen, the glass doors opened. 2 federal agents walked out, holding a man between them. He was handcuffed. His head was bowed. But there was no mistaking the oily suit and the comb-over. It was Finch. "They are arresting him," Preston whispered. "For fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping," I said calmly. I turned off the screen and looked back at them. The room was deadly silent. "You see, I did not just find out about your plan yesterday. I lied. I have known about your plan to frame me for a week. I knew you were forging my medical records. I knew you were paying Finch to bribe the court clerk." I walked over to the table and picked up the fake custody petition Caleb had been waving. "I sent copies of the fake medical records you created to the FBI 3 days ago." I revealed, I sent them the originals to prove they were forgeries. I sent them the bank transfer records where you paid Finch $15,000 from the corporate account to falsify a court document. Caleb dropped the papers. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. You set us up, Caleb gasped. I let you dig your own grave, I said. I just handed you the shovel. I leaned in close to Caleb. That petition you filed this morning, I said softly. You signed it under penalty of perjury. You swore to a federal judge that those lies were true. That is a felony. Caleb, that is 5 years in federal prison. And since you conspired across state lines to kidnap a child using fraudulent legal documents, well, that bumps it up to 10 years. Caleb backed away from me. He hit the glass wall and slid down it, his legs giving out. He looked at his hands, as if he could already see the handcuffs on them. I did not mean to, Caleb stammered. It was Preston. He made me do it. I just signed where he told me to. Preston spun around. You coward. You spineless little worm. You were the one who wanted the girl. I stood in the center of the room, watching them turn on each other. It was pathetic. The titans of industry, the patriarchs, reduced to sniveling children pointing fingers in the dark. It does not matter who had the idea. I said, you both signed. You are both liable. Preston looked at me. His face was gray. The fight had left him. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind only the terrified shell of an old man who realized he had no moves left. Liliana, Preston said, his voice cracking. He took a step toward me, holding out his hands. Liliana, please, look at me. I am your father. Do not, I warned, my voice sharp. I know I made mistakes, Preston pleaded, tears welling up in his eyes. I was hard on you. I admit that. But I did it to make you strong. And look at you. You are strong. You are brilliant. You beat me. Okay, you beat me. I am proud of you. He was trying to manipulate me. He was trying to rewrite history to make his cruelty look like tough love. It was the ultimate insult. We can work this out, Preston continued, desperation creeping into his tone. You do not need to send me to prison. Take the company. Keep the money. Just call off the FBI. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I am 60 years old. Liliana, I cannot survive prison. I will die in there. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had thrown me out into a blizzard without a coat. I looked at the man who had called his own grandchild a liability. I looked at the man who had tried to steal my daughter to save his bank account. I remembered the cold. I remembered the snow biting into my skin. I remembered the hunger. I remembered the nights I slept in my car, shivering, begging the universe for a chance to survive. And I remembered what he had said to me that night. I walked up to him. I stood toe-to-toe with him. I was taller than him in my heels, looking down at the wreckage of his life. 7 years ago, you told me I was a liability to the family name. I said, my voice steady and cold as the grave. You threw me away like trash because you thought I would cost you money. Liliana, please, Preston sobbed. You were right. Father, I said, I was a liability. But you forgot the first rule of distressed assets. I leaned in, my lips inches from his ear. Liabilities do not just disappear. They accrue interest. And now, the bill is due. I pulled back and looked him in the eye. I am not going to call off the FBI. I am not going to save you. You are a bad investment. Preston, you are toxic debt. And I am doing what any good CEO does with toxic debt. I pointed to the door. I am liquidating you. Preston stared at me, his soul shattering behind his eyes. He realized then that there was no mercy coming. There was no daughter left in me to appeal to. He had killed her 7 years ago. Suddenly, the heavy doors to the conference room burst open. I did not turn around. I knew who it was. 2 FBI agents walked in, guns drawn but lowered, followed by Julian Blackwood. Julian looked at me and nodded once. Preston Ashmore, Caleb Thorne, one of the agents shouted, You are under arrest for bankruptcy fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Put your hands behind your back. Caleb started crying. Loud, ugly sobs as the agent grabbed his wrist and spun him around. The handcuffs clicked a sharp, metallic sound that signaled the end of his life as he knew it. Preston did not fight. He stood there, staring at me, his eyes dead. The agent grabbed his arms and pulled them back. Click, click. I watched them. I watched the men who had ruled my world with fear and money being reduced to prisoners. I felt no joy. I felt no sadness. I felt only a profound, cleansing emptiness. The debt was paid. The balance sheet was zeroed out. Take them away. I said to the agents, get them out of my building. As they dragged Preston toward the door, he looked back at me one last time. Liliana, he croaked. I turned my back on him. I faced the window, looking out at the storm clouds breaking over the lake. You are evicted, I whispered to the reflection in the glass. The doors closed. The silence returned, but this time, it was not the silence of tension. It was the silence of peace. The handcuffs were cold, hard steel against Caleb's wrists, but the reality of his destruction had not fully set in until the moment the agents began to push him toward the door. That was when the panic, which had been simmering in his eyes, boiled over into madness. He realized that this was not a bad dream. He realized that he was not going to the country club. He was going to a federal holding cell. In a spasm of desperate, feral energy, Caleb twisted his body violently. He slammed his shoulder into the chest of the FBI agent holding him, breaking the man's grip for a split second. You bitch, Caleb screamed, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hate. He lunged toward me. It was a pathetic, doomed attempt. He was 10 feet away, and his hands were cuffed behind his back. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to wipe the calm, victorious expression off my face because it mirrored his own failure too clearly. He made it 2 steps before Marcus. My head of security, who had been standing silently in the corner, moved with the speed of a striking cobra. Marcus stepped forward and planted a hand on Caleb's chest, shoving him back with enough force to lift him off his feet. Caleb crashed onto the polished concrete floor. Gasping for air, the wind knocked out of him. The FBI agents were on him instantly, pinning him down, their knees pressing into his back. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood over him, looking down at the man who had once promised to love me, the man who had tried to steal my daughter. I am not done, I said, my voice cutting through the sounds of the struggle. I looked at Preston, who was standing frozen by the door, held by 2 other agents. He was staring at Caleb on the floor, his face pale and clammy. Hold them a moment, I instructed the agents. There is one final piece of business. The agents hesitated, then looked at Julian. Julian nodded. They pulled Caleb up to his knees but kept a firm grip on him. You took my company, Preston rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves being crushed. You took my money. You took my freedom. What else is there? Liliana, what else could you possibly take? I walked back to the table and picked up a single sheet of paper. It was a technical schematic, a printout of lines of code. I took the company's assets. Yes, I said, but I realized something during my due diligence. Ashmore Dynamics does not actually own its core product. Preston frowned. What are you talking about? We own the logistics platform. We have the copyright. You have the copyright on the interface. I corrected him, but the source code. The engine that runs the entire system, you stole that. I held up the paper. 7 years ago, when I wrote the original code for the Phantom logistics system, I knew you were unethical. I said, I knew you liked to cut corners. So, I built in a failsafe. I embedded a digital watermark into the kernel of the code. It is a cryptographic signature, hidden in the subroutines. I pointed to a highlighted line on the paper. It spells out my name, Preston, Liliana, and it is date-stamped 3 weeks before you forced me to sign that quitclaim deed. Preston's eyes widened. He knew enough about software law to know what this meant. For 7 years, you have been selling, licensing, and distributing software that contains my intellectual property. I said, you did not just breach a contract. You committed grand larceny of intellectual property on an industrial scale. You sold stolen goods to the government. You sold stolen goods to international banks. I walked closer to him. That is not just a civil lawsuit. Father, that is a federal crime. It is called theft of trade secrets and wire fraud. And because you sold it to the government, it borders on treason. Caleb looked up from the floor, blood trickling from his nose where he had hit the concrete. You cannot prove it. Caleb spat. We rewrote the code. We updated it. You patched it, I said dismissively. You never rewrote the core because you were too cheap to hire real engineers. You just built on top of my foundation. The watermark is still there. I verified it this morning when I gained access to your servers. I turned to Julian. Julian, add the count of intellectual property theft to the file we are sending to the U.S. Attorney. Done, Julian said, making a note on his pad. This means you are not looking at 5 years for bankruptcy fraud. I told them, my voice devoid of pity, you are looking at 20 years. Each. You will be old men when you get out. If you get out. Preston swayed on his feet. The color drained from his face completely, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. He looked like a building whose structural supports had just been dynamited. Just then, Preston's phone, which was sitting on the steel table where he had left it, began to buzz. It was a loud, jarring sound in the quiet room. I picked it up. The caller ID said, Attorney Graves. This was their personal defense lawyer, the one they had hired to defend them against the initial debt collection. Answer it, I said, pressing the speaker button and holding the phone up to Preston's face. Preston stared at the phone. Hello? He whispered. Mr. Ashmore. The voice on the other end was frantic. We have a problem. A major problem. What is it? Preston asked weakly. The retainer check you sent over this morning. The lawyer said, it bounced. The bank says your personal accounts have been frozen. And I just got a call from the court. They are saying there is a lien on your house, your cars, everything. I know, Preston said. Mr. Ashmore, I cannot represent you without payment. The lawyer continued, his voice turning cold. Especially not with the FBI involved. I am formally withdrawing as your counsel effective immediately. Do not call this office again. Click, the line went dead. I set the phone back on the table. No lawyer. I said, no money, no assets, and nowhere to run. Preston looked at me. His eyes were glassy. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg one last time, perhaps to curse me, but no sound came out. He clutched his chest, his knees buckled. He collapsed not with a bang, but with a soft, defeated crumple. He slid down the wall and sat on the floor, his head lolling to the side. He was not dead. I could see his chest heaving and shallow. Panicked gasps, but he was broken. The great Preston Ashmore, the titan of industry, was reduced to a heap of expensive wool and regret on the floor of his enemy's office. Get him up, the lead agent barked. The agents hoisted Preston to his feet. He could barely stand. He looked small. He looked old. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had sold his soul and gotten nothing in return. Take them away, I said. I am tired of looking at them. The agents marched them out. Caleb was dragging his feet, sobbing openly now, a stream of incoherent pleas leaving his lips. Preston was silent, staring at the floor, his mind likely shattered by the magnitude of his ruin. I watched them go. I watched the elevator doors close on them, cutting off the sound of Caleb's crying. Silence returned to the boardroom. It was a pure, clean silence. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the air conditioning. I felt lighter. The weight I had been carrying for 7 years, the anger, the need for validation, the fear, it had all evaporated. Julian closed his folder. It is done, Julian said quietly. The U.S. Attorney is waiting for the IP evidence. They will be arraigned tomorrow morning, with no bail money and no lawyer. They will be remanded to custody immediately. Thank you, Julian. I said, send the invoice and add a bonus. I walked over to the table where a final document was waiting. It was the deed to the building. I picked up a pen. I crossed out the name Ashmore Tower. In the margin, in bold, black ink, I wrote Phoenix Tower. I signed my name below it, Liliana Ashmore, the owner. I handed the document to Julian. File this. I want the signage changed by Monday. I want every trace of the name Ashmore removed from the lobby, the stationery, and the email signatures. The company is now Phoenix Logistics. Understood, Julian said. He took the paper, paused, and looked at me. What will you do now? I looked out the window. The storm had broken. The sun was piercing through the clouds, casting a brilliant, golden light over the city. It was the same light I had seen from the snowy driveway 7 years ago. The light I had vowed to own. Now, I owned it, but I realized something. I did not want to turn it off. I wanted to share it with the only person who mattered. I am going to go be a mother, I said. Julian smiled, a genuine smile this time. Enjoy your dinner, Liliana. He walked out, leaving me alone in my empire. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the safe house. It rang twice. Hello, a small, sweet voice answered. Hi, baby, I said, my voice softening, shedding the armor of the CEO and becoming warm and tender. Mommy Stella chirped. Are you coming? Marcus said we can order pizza. I laughed. It was a sound of pure joy. Yes, sweetie, I am coming. And we are not just ordering pizza. We are going to have ice cream too. Really? Can we have the one with the sprinkles? We can have anything you want. Stella, I said, tears finally pricking my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of relief. We can have the whole world. Are you done with work? She asked. Yes, I said, looking around the empty boardroom one last time. I am done. The work is finished. I hung up the phone and grabbed my purse. I walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete. I did not look back at the empty chairs. I did not look back at the past. I walked into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, sealing me inside the golden box, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. I saw a survivor. And as the elevator began its descent, taking me down from the heights of revenge back to the warmth of my daughter's arms, I thought about the lesson I would teach her one day. They say family is your greatest asset, but sometimes, to protect the family you chose, you have to be willing to write off the family you were born into. You have to audit your life, identify the bad debts, and have the courage to liquidate them, even if those debts share your blood. Because in the end, the only equity that matters is your peace of mind. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed seeing justice served as much as I enjoyed writing it. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but it tastes even better when you share it with friends. Where are you listening from right now? Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'd love to see how far Liliana's story has traveled. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Family Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to support the channel, and smash the hype button so we can get this story out to more people who need to see a toxic family get exactly what they deserve. See you in the next video.